Welcome to today's Mishna Yomi. Today we will have the incredible zchus, the incredible privilege to Mirz Hashem finish Meseches Moed Katan. We find ourselves in Moed Katan, Perek Gimel, Mishnayos Ches and Tes. Mishna Ches, Mishna 8 says as follows: In Manichin Asamita Barachov, Shulahargilas Hesped. Once again, when we go ahead and we have a kvura, or when we have a levayas, a funeral on Chalamayid, we do not go ahead and leave the funeral bier in the street, which was the normal case, in order not to go ahead and encourage hespedim, eulogies. Remember, the halacha is that if you bury someone on Chalamayid, you are not permitted to deliver a eulogy on Chalamayid. So what they used to do is they would place like the casket or the bier, the funeral bier, kind of in the middle of the street, close off the street. Everybody would gather. They deliver hespedim. So on Chalamayid, we just take the deceased immediately to be buried, and we do not put the funeral bier in the middle of the street in order not to encourage any type of hespedim. And in general, when a woman passes away, we never leave the funeral bier. We never leave the funeral bier in the street. Ultimately, again, out of honor and dignity for the woman. So there's a couple of different explanations for that. So some understand that ultimately, again, the Rambam understands that it's considered to be a lack of tznius, it's considered to be a lack of modesty for the woman's funeral bier to be left out. Others explain, interestingly enough, that this was dafka in a tragic case of where a woman died in the midst of childbirth. And there was a concern that the body may still be issuing forth blood after her death, and it would be a bizayon, a lack of dignity to leave the body out in a state like that. So they kind of made like a blanket rule that we do not put the funeral bier of a woman in the street. Rather, again, right after death, we bury. Of course, there's an opportunity for eulogies, but it sounds like more often than not, eulogies were delivered even after the burial. So the Mishna goes on, he says, Noshim b'moed ma'anos avalom metapchos. Women during Chalamayid ma'anos. Now we're actually going to define this term in the next Mishnah, but what it means is ma'anos is a form of crying out, of mourning, of wailing together. Avalom metapchos. Metapchos was when the women used to clap, their hands one against the other as a display of mourning. It's almost like a clapping, not a joyous clapping, but a mournful clapping. Rabbi Shmuel says, Hasmuchos lemita metapchos. Those who are closest to the funeral bier have the ability to go ahead and clap their hands together. Again, not out of joy, but out of a display of mourning. Last Mishnah, Meseches Moed Katan. Berashe Chadashim, B'Chanukah B'Purim, Anosh Chodesh, Chanukah Purim, Ma'anos umetapchos. Women are permitted to go ahead and ma'anos, cry out together, or people are permitted to cry out together, umetapchos, and they're permitted to go ahead and clap their hands again as a form of mourning as well. Bazeh ubazeh lo mekonenos. But both Anosh Chodesh, Chanukah, and Purim. So mekonenos. Now we're going to see this mekonenos is really a responsive wailing, a responsive crying was not permitted. Nikbar hames, once the dead is buried, lo ma'anos v'lo metapchos. They are not permitted to cry out, nor are they permitted to clap their hands together as a display of mourning. Eizehu inui. What is this ma'anos? What is inui? Shekulon onos ka'achas. It's when all the women were crying out together. Kina, what's mekonenos? Sha'achas medaberes v'kulon onos achareha. That one woman cries out, and then everyone else responds. So it's a responsive lamenting, a responsive wailing. So the Mishnah goes on. The Mishnah says, Shene Emar quotes the pasuk from Yirmiyahu, Vela meidna b'nosechem nehi v'isha re'usa kina. Literally, teach your daughters to lament nehi, and each woman shall teach her friend kina. So you see over here that the inoy, v'lamdena nehi, the calling out, that's done all together. The kina, mekonenos, ultimately is responsive. The Mishnah ends off with something so stirring and beautiful, because we've been speaking about all of these Mishnayos, we've been speaking about Avelos and what you're allowed to do and how the halachos of Shiva and Yom Tiv, everything comes together. So the Mishnah ends off on a high note. Aval asid lavo omer, when Mashiach comes, Mirz Hashem, the Navi Yeshayahu tells us, Bila hamaves lanetzach, death will be swallowed up forever. U'mocha Hashem dima me'al kol panim, and Hashem will erase the tears from all faces. So the Mishnah telling us that as much as now we must contend with the halachos of Avelos, and we must deal with the reality that we live in a world of loss, and we live in a world of sadness, and we live in a world of tragedy and despair, the day will come where death will be swallowed up forever, and Amirat Hashem when HaKadosh Baruch Hu will dry the tears from our face. May we be Zoche Amirat Hashem to experience that day b'mhira b'yameinu. Amen. Mazel Tov on finishing Meseches Moed Katan.